Good morning, everybody. Let me start by thanking Masih Alinejad for joining us today. Masih, it's good to see you again, and we appreciate that. Senator Cardin, thank you very much for your leadership on this issue. We're going to talk this morning about a really important topic, and this is bipartisan legislation to impose sanctions which are meant to hold Iran accountable for actually targeting an American citizen on U.S. soil, while our diplomats are discussing sanctions relief for Iran in Vienna. Let me give a little bit of an overview. Iran's malign behavior at home and abroad and its effort to undermine international norms is a huge challenge for the United States and a threat to the United States. What do we know about the regime in Iran? We know that they are the world's greatest state sponsor of terrorism. They support terrorist proxies and militias that have ramped up attacks on U.S. personnel and allies, including in recent weeks and months. We know they continue to blackmail the U.S. with a nuclear weapons program, and they are now on the verge of enriching to nuclear weapons levels. We know they hold foreign citizens hostage as bargaining chips. We know they crush peaceable assemblies and freedom of expression, and just this month the regime violently suppressed water protests in an Iranian city. But we're here specifically to talk about Masih's story. It's an amazing story. In July, Americans woke up to learn about Iranian terror on U.S. soil. I'm just humbled and grateful to be joined here today by Masih. She is a courageous Iranian-American journalist and activist who was the target of Tehran's kidnapping plot. She's an American hero. She came out of hiding to be here today. That's how she has to live. The Department of Justice unveiled that Iranian spies conspired to seize Masih from her home in Brooklyn and take her on a boat to Venezuela. This is the Department of Justice. From there, they would force her back to Iran, where she would undoubtedly have been executed, just like other Iranian dissidents whom Iran has kidnapped from other foreign countries. Never before has this regime in Tehran tried to abduct a U.S. citizen on U.S. soil. This is a brazen escalation by the regime in Iran, and it requires a proportionate response. It's worth asking, why is the regime so afraid of Masih that they have to attempt these unbelievable measures? Well, there's a reason. It's because she's the voice of Iran's voiceless, particularly Iranian women in their fight against compulsory hijab. She was born in Iran. Masih grew up to be a successful journalist exposing corruption until she was expelled from the country in 2009. In 2014, she started a viral Facebook campaign where women in Iran would take pictures of themselves without the mandatory headscarves, and then they would send the images to Masih, who would post them. Her campaign inspired a protest movement in Iran, a protest movement for freedom. And what does it tell you about the Iranian regime that they're so afraid of women's hair? But Masih has inspired countless Iranians to defy the regime's restrictions on speech, on dress, and political activity. She's been an advocate for personal freedom. The regime tries to silence her with death threats and pressure on her family. Her sister was forced to denounce her on state TV. They arrested her brother. They harassed her mother. But despite the intimidation, Masih continues to fight for the basic freedom of the Iranian people. We need to hold Iran accountable for this outrageous behavior. Despite the fact that her case received global attention this past summer, lethal threats against Masih and her family have actually increased. She's under constant FBI protection. And Masih is one of the countless victims of Iran's ongoing transnational repression to silence dissidents and journalists. Clearly, Iran is not getting the message that this malign behavior, especially against a U.S. citizen on U.S. soil, is not going to be tolerated. And that's why Senator Cardin and I have teamed up to introduce the Masih Alinejad Harassment and Unlawful Targeting Act to hold Iran accountable and to deter further attacks. What our bill would do is it would impose mandatory sanctions against agents of Tehran who target critics of the Iranian regime, and it would dries up Tehran's sources of financing transnational repression by authorizing secondary sanctions on banks that do business with those designated agents. As the administration is discussing economic relief with Iran this week in Vienna, I'm glad to be here with Senator Cardin, working to hold Iran accountable and to demonstrate that human rights and U.S. national security interests have to be paramount and cannot be sacrificed for a flawed nuclear deal. This is what America is all about. There is no country in the world but the United States that has advanced and will continue to advance the moral leadership required to provide hope for those around the world who are threatened by the kind of authoritarianism that we see governing Iran. Senator Biden? I'm sorry.